The alarm that split the night air across the Kelrath Xenobiology Research Station was not the kind anyone had drilled for. It was containment level Omega. In 17 years of operation, the station had never triggered a level Omega alarm. The facility housed 43 species of extraterrestrial fauna, creatures collected from dead moons, gas cloud caverns, and the lightless deep ocean floors of worlds humanity had only recently learned to name. Most were docile. Most were sedated. Most were not Kale Vera. Kale Vera was the single specimen of his kind in captivity. Possibly the only one ever captured alive. A Vathran apex, 9 feet of obsidian-scaled predator from the storm continent of Vathra Prime, where the gravity ran twice Earth standard and the apex of the food chain had earned that title by consuming everything else on it. His containment cell was reinforced titanium alloy, 6 inches thick, ionically sealed, and monitored by 12 independent systems. He had been inside it for 8 months. Now he was not. Mara Ellison was still in Lab 7 when the alarm went off. She was 23 years old, a xenobiology graduate student on her first off-world rotation, and she had stayed 3 hours past the end of her shift because she was this close to cracking the communication pattern she'd been mapping in Kale Vera's subsonic vocalization data. She had not, in those 3 hours, eaten anything. She had not checked the emergency evacuation route she was supposed to have memorized on day 1. She had not, crucially, noticed that the corridor behind her had gone very, very quiet. The lights cut to red emergency strips. The alarm screamed. Mara knocked her coffee off the desk, lunged for her tablet, and pulled up the station map, then froze when she saw every other blue dot representing personnel converging on the eastern evacuation bay. She was in the western wing. Alone. She grabbed her jacket, her tablet, and her personal comm unit, and she ran. The corridor was dim and pulsing crimson, and somewhere ahead she could hear the ventilation system groaning, the sound it made when something large was moving through spaces it wasn't supposed to fit. She remembered reading that Vathran apexes could compress their skeletal structure by nearly 40%. She had thought that was academically interesting at the time. She turned a corner and ran directly into a wall of living darkness. Kale Vera filled the corridor. He was crouched, still nearly as tall as she was standing, and his scales caught the emergency lights and scattered them in broken red fragments across the walls. His 4 eyes were open. Luminous gold, slit-pupilled, fixed entirely on her. His breathing was a low, rhythmic sound like distant thunder. Mara Ellison did not run. She did not run because her legs had stopped accepting instructions from her brain, and also because some deeply irrational part of her recognized that running from an apex predator in an enclosed corridor was the single worst thing a person could do. So she stood there, tablet clutched to her chest, and she looked at Kale Vera. And Kale Vera looked at her. For 4 seconds, nothing happened. Then Kale Vera made a sound she recognized. It was a low, descending 3-tone sequence. She had cataloged it. She had written a 17-page paper on it. She had labeled it Vocalization Pattern 7 in her dataset and annotated it with a tentative translation, acknowledged presence, non-threat assessment. He had made that sound at her, specifically, 14 times during her observation sessions. He made it now. Mara's brain rebooted. "Hi," she said. Her voice only cracked a little. Kale Vera tilted his head. Then he moved, fluid and terrifyingly fast, and positioned himself between her and the direction the distant alarm was loudest. She understood, then, why the alarm was still going. It wasn't him they were alarmed about. "Something else got out," she said aloud. Not a question. A second sound from Kale Vera. Pattern 12, confirmed, understood, agreed. She had spent 8 months on the other side of 6 inches of tritanium, talking to him through a vocalization array, building a fragile scaffolding of mutual language out of sounds and responses and the slow, painstaking work of showing up every single day to sit with him and learn. The other researchers thought she was wasting her time. The station director had told her twice that Vathran apexes were not communicators, they were predators, and predators did not converse. She had disagreed, politely, both times. She disagreed less politely now, because Kale Vera had just pressed himself against the left wall of the corridor, angled his body to shield the maximum amount of space behind him, and looked back at her with an unmistakable expression she had also catalogued, "Stay close." "Okay," Mara said. "Okay. I'm staying close." What emerged from the eastern corridor junction was a Skrull Ravager, six-limbed, acid-spitting, and deeply unhappy about being awakened from sedation. It was smaller than Kale Vera. It was also fast enough to have dissolved 3 of the station's interior doors to get here, and it was pointing its secondary jaw structure directly at Mara. What happened next lasted approximately 11 seconds. Mara saw almost none of it because Kale Vera moved in front of her so fast the air pressure change pushed her back a step. What she heard was a sound like a thunderclap, a wet tearing noise she chose not to analyze, and then silence. She looked around Kale Vera's shoulder. The Skrull Ravager was against the far wall. It was alive. It was also going to stay very, very still for a long time, because the Vathran apex was standing over it and the apex's expression communicated, across all species barriers, with perfect crystalline clarity, "Test me again." The Ravager did not test him again. Kale Vera turned back to Mara. He made a new sound, one she hadn't catalogued before. Low, warm, almost resonant. His head dipped slightly. Her tablet was still recording. She would spend the next 6 months writing the paper on that sound. She would title the vocalization pattern 47, and her translation would be contested by 4 senior xenobiologists who had never once sat on the other side of the glass and simply listened. Her translation was, "You are under my protection." She looked up at 9 feet of obsidian predator who had, in the last 45 seconds, chosen her over freedom, and she said, very quietly, "So it was just between them, I know. I know you are." The evacuation teams found them 20 minutes later, Mara Ellison sitting cross-legged on the floor of Corridor 7, tablet in her lap, running a new vocalization recording, while Kale Vera crouched beside her like a gargoyle made of living stone, watching both ends of the corridor with the patient, absolute attention of something that had never once in its life needed to be afraid of anything. The security chief later wrote in his report that the Vathran apex had appeared domesticated. Mara read that word and laughed for a long time. He wasn't domesticated. He wasn't tamed. He wasn't broken or trained or conditioned. He was an apex, the most dangerous thing on his world, and possibly several others, and he had looked at one small human who had shown up every day for 8 months and talked to him like he was worth talking to, and he had made a decision. That was the thing about apex predators that the containment protocols never accounted for. Some of them chose. Humanity's greatest survival trait was never its weapons, its technology, or its aggression. It was the stubborn, irrational, species-wide compulsion to sit down next to something dangerous and say, "Hello, I'd like to understand you." And mean it.